You're not a good cultural fit anymore, he said, adjusting his little friendship bracelet like he'd just solved world peace. That was the line. That was the moment 5 years of bloodshot mornings, 3 a.m. database rebuilds, and a startup built from ramen fumes and Red Bull died in a whimper. No warning, no board vote. Just the CEO's nephew, Dylan, yes, Dylan, installed as COO like he'd been summoned from a LinkedIn influencer factory. Now sitting across from me at the company I built, explaining my obsolescence with the confidence of a guy who once sold weed gummies mislabeled as nootropic supplements. I looked at him. Really looked. Gelled hair, $900 sneakers he couldn't pronounce, and the vacant expression of someone whose deepest trauma was getting banned from Discord for spamming crypto kitties. He didn't flinch, just smiled like he'd rehearsed this moment in the mirror of his Equinox locker room. I said nothing. That's what got him, not a protest, not a clapback, just nothing. No fight, no tears. I stood, collected my planner, and nodded once. The silence buzzed louder than any scream. The CFO blinked. Legal shifted in her seat. Dylan looked around, almost disappointed I hadn't thrown a chair or at least called him a fraud. But I don't throw tantrums, I build empires. Quietly? Hey, by the way, since 97% of folks who listen to these stories don't subscribe, do me a solid, will ya? Hit that subscribe button and toss a like our way. It seriously helps keep this twisted little machine running. Think of it as fueling the next revenge plot. Appreciate you. Back in the office, the farewell Slack was already drafted for me by HR, who used the word mutually. As in, after a mutually agreed transition. Mutually like a car crash is mutually attended. Nobody had even updated my headshot on the About page, but my keycard was deactivated by the time I hit the elevator. Clean sweep, corporate amnesia in action. The sad part, it worked. They wanted me gone. My instincts, my systems, my long nights solving things nobody understood enough to fix, all of it suddenly legacy, which is startup speak for makes us look old. They wanted younger, louder, more visionary, someone who spoke in catchphrases and called burnout founder energy. So they brought in Dylan, said it was time for a leadership refresh, like I was a browser tab hanging too long. Dylan strutted into the weekly stand-ups, tossing out buzzwords like scalabilitize and hyperloop our user funnel. I once caught him trying to Google what on-prem meant in the middle of a meeting with our biggest enterprise client. But the team, they watched. Quietly. They saw the shift. The engineers, my people, they started calling him PowerPoint Nepo. The ops lead who used to run weekend scrums with me just stared at her shoes during his announcements. Morale didn't tank, it evaporated. But nobody said a word, and me, I watched too. From the outside. Not with bitterness yet, but with a strange calm. Like watching someone repaint your house the color of baby puke after you'd spent years restoring it plank by plank. It hurt, sure, but I'd planned for this. Oh yeah. See, 5 years ago when we were scraping together seed rounds and I was still coding from my kitchen counter with my cat sleeping on the router, I knew one day someone would try to take it from me. Maybe a founder fight. Maybe a merger. Or maybe, just maybe, some snot-nosed failson would walk in like he owned the place and try to bury me under a fake org chart. So I didn't put my name on everything. I created shell entities, trusts, proxy votes. Redundant permissions buried 3 layers deep. My lawyer, bless his paranoid little heart, once said, "You're planning for betrayal that hasn't happened." I said, "No, I'm planning for when it does," and here it was. Dylan thought he fired me. Legally, he couldn't fire a damn thing I controlled. But I let him think he had, because some storms you don't stop. You just wait for them to run out of thunder. I went home that day, poured a glass of wine, and pulled up our internal server logs. I still had access. Of course I did. Admin rights with a decoy expiration. No one noticed. I clicked through backend dashboards, watched the metrics stutter, burn rate rising, conversion sinking, a marketing spend that smelled like burning cash wrapped in hashtag confetti. And still nothing. No revenge, no message, not yet. The week before Dylan oozed into the COO chair like a reheated hot pocket, I had a feeling, not a dramatic premonition, just a quiet itch, like smelling smoke before anyone else notices. The CEO had stopped replying to my 1-1 pings. Our board meeting had mysteriously rescheduled 3 times. And the finance guy, who once couldn't balance a cappuccino budget, suddenly asked me how non-voting equity worked. I should have been insulted. Instead, I laughed so hard I almost choked on my protein bar. Because 5 years ago, while the rest of the team argued over whether to use Slack or Discord, I was on the phone with a man named Curtis L. Bentham-esque, a probate and trust attorney with the charisma of a DMV printer and the strategic mind of a Bond villain. Curtis didn't ask why I wanted my shares hidden behind a Delaware holding company, owned by a Wyoming trust governed by a second trust in Nevada. He just asked how fast I needed it done. We built it like a fortress. Technically, I didn't own the company anymore. Not directly. The majority voting rights were in the hands of something called Crescent Kestrel Capital Trust, which I controlled through a third-party entity that didn't even list my name in the articles of organization. If you followed the paperwork trail long enough, you'd get a migraine. Which was the point. Dylan's little coup didn't even touch the real wiring of the company. They pulled out what they thought was the plug, and all they'd yanked was a decorative lamp cord. Bless their hearts. When HR sent me the exit documents, I smiled at the language. This termination represents the end of all formal responsibilities. Cute, like firing the plumbing because the sink's clogged. I didn't protest. I didn't ask for severance. I didn't even schedule the traditional passive-aggressive farewell lunch. That's what threw them. You know what I did do? I forwarded the notice to Curtis, CCing his paralegal and a very boring man named Glenn whose LinkedIn title was simply Compliance Counsel. Glenn doesn't post memes. Glenn doesn't circle back. Glenn files, silently, thoroughly. He was already 6 steps ahead, flagging clauses in the operating agreement Dylan didn't know existed. There was a clause, buried on page 17, that required unanimous consent from all class of voting members to remove an executive founder. I had 90%. Dylan had dreams, but I didn't invoke it, because I needed them to think they'd won. Nothing clouds the judgment of mediocre men faster than the illusion of power. And Dylan, he strutted around like he'd conquered Rome, not realizing the city was built on my plumbing, and that I still held the water valve. He started posting selfies from the leadership corner on LinkedIn with captions like, "Hard decisions make strong companies." He took credit for a backend deployment he didn't understand, mispronounced containerized, and started referring to our dev environment as the cloud stuff. My engineers would screenshot his posts and send them to me like war trophies. And me, I was quiet. I let them build their empire of confidence on a foundation of Jenga blocks. Product roadmap was now a pitch deck fever dream filled with phrases like AI disruption funnel and Web3 gamification layers. They were pivoting so fast, I half expected them to launch a food truck called Blockchain BBQ. Every now and then I get a DM from someone still inside. "Hey, just checking in. This doesn't feel right without you." He tried to rename our app yesterday to Buzzmark. I never replied with strategy, just a simple hold the line. But behind the curtain, Curtis and Glenn were moving. They updated my proxy vote to activate under material organizational misrepresentation. They filed a quiet update with the state registry reconfirming the trust majority standing. No press, no noise, just legal tectonics shifting beneath Dylan's discount dynasty. Let them smile, let them gloat. Because somewhere in a dusty corner of their own cap table, the truth was quietly waiting. Wrapped in legal language they'd never understand, behind entities they'd never control. And the best part, they handed me the matchbook. I was just waiting for the right room to burn, or better yet, reclaim. It started with the kombucha fridge. Out of nowhere, the kitchen, once stocked with actual food for people who worked 14-hour sprints, was now a shrine to fermented tea and gut-friendly productivity shots. Dylan unveiled it like he'd reinvented the wheel. "We're building culture," he said, grinning like a toddler with finger paint on his face. "Startups thrive on energy. Vibes, community." What he meant was he didn't understand product, tech, or cash flow, so he bought neon beanbags and a monthly mindfulness consultant named Sage, whose real name I later found out was Todd. He installed a mood board near the elevator, where employees were supposed to write how they were feeling with scented dry erase markers. The engineers ignored it. The interns drew dicks. Marketing wrote #grateful in pastel ink every damn morning. Dylan strutted through it all like a cult leader in beta. Weekly pep talks. Buzzword-laced monologues about synergy alignment and disruptive compassion. He tried to start a ritual where everyone clapped for each other at the end of all-hands meetings. I watched a recording. Half the team clapped. The other half stared like he'd farted in an elevator. And then the real rot started to bloom. First, he scrapped our internal dev tools in favor of a no-code platform pitched to him by an AI guru he met at a rooftop crypto brunch. Never mind that the tools we'd built in-house were the only reason we'd survived 2 failed funding rounds. He called them legacy tech and said we needed to let go of limiting stories. Then he fired 2 QA leads and replaced them with a Fiverr contractor who misspelled our company name on a bug report. He handed product over to a 23-year-old former TikTok manager who claimed to be obsessed with user friction. She thought API was a smoothie place. A finance analyst, Dev, a guy so straight-laced he once color-coded his sock drawer, started showing up late. I knew something was off when he missed a deadline for the first time in 2 years. Quietly, no fanfare, just late, then came the pings. The first one was from Ellie, our lead engineer. Just a single line, still got access. I stared at the message for a minute, reread it, then typed always, no emoji, no follow-up. None needed. 2 days later. Lisa from product, real product, not TikTok Barbie, sent a Dropbox link with no context. It was a spreadsheet titled Decisions That Will Bite Us in the Ass V2. The first row just said, Dylan thinks load testing is a TikTok trend. I didn't reply, I just watched, noted, breathed. Hope doesn't come in fireworks. It shows up in cryptic Slack messages and silent Google Docs. In overlooked engineers choosing to stay late, not because they believe in leadership, but because they remember why we started. A week later, Dev sent a spreadsheet of burn rate projections. Nothing in the body of the email, just the file, projected cash flow nightmare scenario XLSX. Inside were notes, small, cryptic like whispers written in margin comments. One said, if we last 6 more months, it'll be a miracle. Another, did anyone approve the influencer campaign spend? Turns out Dylan had greenlit a six-figure partnership with a lifestyle guru who once got canceled for saying women could cure anxiety with crystal eggs. The influencer posted once, misspelled our name, and never mentioned us again. That's when I knew this wasn't a takeover. It was a collapse in slow motion, a sinking ship throwing confetti to distract from the waterline. But I wasn't alone, not anymore. Ellie sent a screenshot next. Code comment from a backend commit pushed at 2:13 a.m. Hash for the record, she built this, not him. The caption under her message, just letting the repo know, I didn't cry, didn't even smile. I just closed my laptop, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling for a long, long time. Because sometimes all it takes is a few quiet hands holding the cracks closed until you're ready to rebuild. The first time I logged in again, I half expected alarms to go off. Red blinking lights, Slack exploding, Dylan screaming in all caps from the roof. But no, just the familiar hum of silence, the comforting click of keys, and the backend dashboard blinking to life like it had been waiting for me this whole time. They never revoked my access. Not because they forgot, no, Dylan had proudly announced that all old accounts were deactivated. But he was talking about usernames, permissions. He didn't understand infrastructure. No, the admin credentials were split across services, and that one of them, buried deep in our legacy deployment pipeline, wasn't tied to a name. It was tied to a system role, a role I had built. I didn't touch anything major, not yet, just a ping to the CI/CD server to make sure it still answered. It did, like a loyal dog who never understood why you left. I poked around quietly. The new build was bloated, unstable. It added 4 third-party plugins that weren't even necessary. One of them was a drag-and-drop feature Dylan apparently thought would revolutionize onboarding. It broke every time you clicked past step 3. No version control discipline. API keys stored in plain text. Unfinished A/B tests running in production like headless chickens. I wasn't surprised, just disappointed, like watching your childhood treehouse turned into a vape lounge. Then, tucked in the commit history, I saw it. Commit A1E34FB, fixed broken modal, again. Author Ellie message, hash bring her back. It sat there like graffiti on a crumbling wall. Bold, stupid, beautiful, I didn't respond. But I took a breath, one of those deep, full-body breaths you didn't know you'd been holding for weeks. Because that line, buried in the code, told me something louder than any rally cry. They missed me and they still believed. So I ran a rollback, just a private one. No production impact, no systems affected. I deployed a previous build, clean, functional hours into a sandbox server. Just to see if I could. 10 minutes later, the test site was humming. Error-free, fluid, stable. The UI loaded in 2 seconds flat. No broken links, no glitching walkthroughs, no TikTok-themed tooltips. I stared at it like an old photograph. It looked like us before the smoothies, before the beanbags, before Dylan's vision of brand synergy turned us into a joke. This was ours. The build I'd spent 3 months sculpting, refining between midnight coffees and dawn stand-ups. The one that survived our first real client crash and scaled under pressure like a damn champion. I didn't save it, didn't push it anywhere else. Just let it breathe. And then I shut it down. Because this wasn't the moment, not yet. You don't walk back into the arena waving a flag and screaming vengeance. That's how amateurs die in the first round. Know this was recon, just a reminder to myself that I still knew where the bones were buried, that I could raise the whole beast if I wanted to. Later that night, Ellie texted, was it you? I replied, just brushing off the dust. 3 dots, then nothing. Then finally, good. I closed the window, took a sip of wine, no panic, no rush. Let them have their little puppet show for now. Let them believe the curtains closed. They didn't know the ghost in their machine had just stretched her fingers. Dylan called it the Phoenix Plan. As in, burn everything to the ground and hope something sexy rises from the ashes. He announced it via a Slack voice note, which, by the way, should be classified as a workplace violation, at 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday. Said he'd been marinating in innovation all weekend and decided we were pivoting from enterprise workflow tools to, wait for it, creator monetization microservices. Nobody knew what that meant, least of all Dylan. His exact words were, we help influencers influence better. We're not a product, we're a vibe architecture. Next day, half the QA team was let go with a bland email and a link to a Career Karma blog post. Devs were told they'd be phased out in favor of an offshore team Dylan found through a guy named Vic on Telegram. The new crew didn't even get onboarding logins for the first 4 days. They pushed one live update that crashed the entire mobile experience. Dylan called it a learning sprint. Ellie forwarded me the commit log with a one-word caption, carnage. Meanwhile, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by takeout containers, combing through financial records. Because Dylan didn't just have bad ideas. He had expensive bad ideas. And since my access to the finance layer had never been revoked, thank you, multi-factor authentication loopholes, and lazy role reassignment, I watched in real time as the company hemorrhaged cash like a Vegas groom on his second divorce. Here's what I saw. $74,000 on brand activation with a marketing agency that mostly reposted our tweets with emojis. $118,000 on culture investments, which included the kombucha fridge, a mural of a platypus in sunglasses, and an NFT team spirit badge nobody asked for. $212,000 to the offshore dev team, paid upfront, who to this day have never pushed a bug-free build. And my personal favorite, $19,300 on executive optimization coaching for Dylan, which apparently involved him sitting in a salt chamber listening to whale noises while journaling about power dynamics. The burn rate had tripled. Revenue was flatlining. Churn was creeping up like mold in a flooded basement. And yet Dylan was grinning on Zoom calls, bragging about market resonance and teasing a major announcement at the next all hands. Said we were days away from revolutionizing digital touchpoints. The board, silent, distant, drunk on Series B projections and desperate not to look like they'd bet on the wrong horse. So I made a decision. Not revenge, not ego. Triaging the patient while the family argues about furniture. I opened a secure channel, spoofed IP, cloaked metadata, used an old signal burner tied to an LLC I once made for a side project. I drafted a packet and sent it to 3 people: the board's lead investor, our primary underwriter, and the CFO's external accounting firm. Inside, month-by-month cash flow burn versus revenue, negative 31% trend, unfiled tax exposure from creative expenses, contracts with influencers who never posted and one who blocked us mid-campaign, screenshots of executive chat logs where Dylan called the QA team dead weight we can Upwork away. Subject line, operational risk summary, internal review. Sender name, Audit Rebuild Corp. Internal integrity monitor, no signature, no trace. I didn't wait for a reply, but I knew they'd seen it. The CFO's assistant deleted her LinkedIn the next day. The board portal went into scheduled maintenance the following morning. 2 finance team members suddenly locked their Slack profiles, and Dylan, oblivious, scheduled a mandatory all-hands for Friday, called it the big reveal. He sent out a hype reel trailer, yes, a trailer, with stock footage of lions, rockets launching, and a Can-I instrumental under the tagline, "Rebirth is inevitable." I saved the video, not because it inspired me, but because it would look perfect next to the burn rate graph. We weren't just heading toward a cliff. He had lit the gas-soaked bridge behind us and was throwing sparklers. And me, I wasn't planning a hit. I was prepping a rescue op for the product, for the people who built it, for the damn soul of the thing. His name was Marcus, but everyone called him Sound Guy Jesus. Long hair, black hoodies year-round, lived on energy drinks and hot Cheetos. He'd been with us since the early demo days when our AV system was just a $60 mic duct taped to a broomstick. I hired him straight out of a community college AV tech program, not because of his resume, but because during his interview he said, "I can make any idiot sound expensive." I said, "I'll be working with founders. That's a requirement." He grew into more than a tech. He became the quiet spine of every product demo, every investor meeting, every major launch. When we couldn't afford a real control booth, he ran the entire A/V stream off a battered ThinkPad balanced on 2 crates. He once kept a key client Zoom running by hot wiring a broken conference room speaker with speaker wire and a chewing gum wrapper. No joke. And then came Dylan. Dylan thought Marcus was too analog, said we needed media energy, and replaced him with an LA-based agency that showed up late to their own onboarding call. But Marcus didn't quit. He got reassigned to facility operations, which meant wiping whiteboards and setting up folding chairs for wellness roundtables. He stayed, silently, observing. So when I reached out, it wasn't a pitch. It was a reckoning. I found his personal email in a shared doc from 2019 labeled "Do Not Delete." I wrote exactly 1 sentence. "You still believe in what we built?" 5 minutes later, his reply came, "When do you need me?" We met in the loading bay behind the old office, like we were planning a heist, not a presentation. He was leaning on a dolly full of extension cords, smoking a clove cigarette like some kind of noir sound guy monk. "You're not here for revenge," he said, not as a question, just fact. "Nope," I said, "just the truth." He nodded, tossed the cigarette, and asked, "What do you want to happen?" "I want them to hear the truth, see it, and I want you to decide when the mic cuts." A small grin tugged at his mouth. "Dylan's gonna shit a linen pant." We went over the logistics. Dylan had outsourced the stream to a freelance team who were, quote, brand forward but non-technical. Translation, expensive idiots. Marcus still had access to the broadcast stack. He'd wired the original infrastructure himself, and they never fully changed it. All I needed was 1 moment of silence. 1 broken mic, 1 frozen slide, then the handoff. Marcus would cue up the real presentation. Mine, not dramatic, no animation. Just ownership structure, facts and filings, and then let the numbers do the talking. He didn't ask for payment. He didn't even ask what was in it for him. He just said, "You saved my ass back when I almost got fired for swearing at a board member. You said, Marcus is the only person in this room who knows how to fix anything that matters. You remember that?" "Yeah," I said, because it was true. We shook on it. No contracts, no NDA. Just 2 people who remembered when this company still meant something. Before the rooftop DJs. before the vision decks full of lion gifs and dopamine metaphors, before Dylan tried to build a personality out of 10x quotes and overpriced cologne. Marcus walked away that night, dragging a cart full of cables behind him, humming low to himself. That's when I felt it, not rage, not bitterness. Vindication. Because leadership isn't about buzzwords or beanbags, it's about who still shows up when you're not in the room, and Marcus, he never left the booth. He just waited for the right cue. Friday, 9:48 a.m. Countdown clock ticked on the company-wide stream. All hands begins in 12 o'clock. Dylan was backstage in what he demanded be called the executive green room, wearing a blazer with no shirt underneath. His hair was freshly gelled into something that looked like it should come with a warning label. He was pacing in slow, theatrical circles, practicing his lines like he was about to launch a cult, not a product. Today, he whispered, gazing at himself in a handheld mirror, "We birthed the future." Marcus, in the tech booth upstairs, muted the AV channel just to avoid hurling. Meanwhile, I sat at home, coffee gone cold, Wi-Fi hardwired, 4 open windows on a second monitor, each one tracking a different layer of the feed. First login, board member #2, then #4, then the VP of strategy. Then our largest investor, his name glowing like a blinking warning in the attendee list. Then the CFO's calendar showed, joined via iPhone. Then Lisa from product, then Ellie, then Dev, they were all there, the entire org, he had no idea. In the green room, Dylan was doing push-ups on carpet before a live keynote. He finished with a grunt, clapped, then turned to the camera crew like he expected applause. Marcus deadpanned, 10 minutes. Dylan smirked, unwrapped a protein bar, and winked at a junior comms intern whose soul visibly left her body. Upstairs, Marcus patched me into the comm line just long enough for me to hear him say, "Signals good. Trigger ready, on your mark." My hands hovered over the notes. Not to read from, just a ritual, the original deck, the old roadmap, metrics I hadn't touched in months. I flipped through them like you flip through a yearbook before a funeral. My heart wasn't pounding. It was drumming, like a warning, like a countdown. Every second a step closer. 9:58. Dylan took the stage, lights dimmed. Executive announcement flashed across every employee's screen. He strutted out like a game show host about to give away jet skis. I watched his face light up as the camera rolled. He waved, blew a kiss. Actually blew a kiss. Marcus's finger hovered over the trigger. 3, he whispered. 2, I took a breath, because when the silence hits, it has to land like thunder. Dylan stepped into the spotlight like it was made just for him. Arms wide, face glowing like he'd just won a reality show for trust fund profits. "Ladies and gentlemen," he beamed, voice smooth and hollow, "this is the dawn of Click." Nothing, no voice, no echo, just static silence, crisp and clean like the universe held its breath. Dylan blinked, tapped the mic, tried again. Static pop, future garble, then nothing at all. He gave a tight little laugh, looked offstage toward the tech booth, raised both hands like, "Guys," then the screens behind him flickered. No music, no transition, no brand colors. Just a single, sterile slide, black on white, equity holdings and proxy rights, a visual breakdown, and beneath it, prepared by founding architect, class a controlling member. Dylan froze, 1 foot forward, mouth half open. The camera caught him in 1080p confusion, his hand still mid-gesture like a wax statue caught in a glitch. From where I sat, I heard Marcus breathe out slowly through his nose, one finger still on the trigger. In homes, offices, and we work booths across 4 time zones, people leaned in. Slack channels stopped pinging. A developer in Berlin paused his CI pipeline. The boardroom stream went eerily still. And then the second slide loaded. A chart, simple, clear, ownership stakes by controlling entity. Crescent Kestrel Capital Trust, 90%. Dylan's shell company, 0.4%. The LLC that funded Dylan's media wing, not listed. A gasp rolled through the company feed like a low wind, quiet, scattered, real. Then came the timeline, voting proxy structure established, March 2019. Contingency clause activation, June 2023. Last voting amendment, 4 weeks ago. Screenshots of board filings, digital signatures. Legal memos, timestamped and authenticated. Slide after slide, perfectly sequenced, not flashy, not angry, just truth, clinical, surgical, indisputable. Dylan backed away from the screen like it was radioactive. He turned to the tech booth, panic blooming across his face like a rash. Marcus sat with his arms crossed, stone-faced, headphones off. He didn't even blink. "Cut the deck," Dylan snapped. "Cut the deck," nothing. He turned back to the audience who couldn't hear him, mouthing something about unauthorized access and legal team and internal review. But the live stream was already rolling through the final slides. One read simply, "Your leadership was never ratified. Your authority was never real." Then came the capstone. A full company org chart with me at the top. Title, Founder, Operational Controller, Executive Chair, Active. The silence became something solid, tangible, the kind you feel between your ribs. And there I was, finally. On screen, live camera. I hadn't spoken a word yet, didn't need to. The truth had done the talking. I sat still, hands folded, expression calm, because this wasn't about burning Dylan to the ground. This was about bringing the company back to life, one clean cut at a time. I stepped into the frame with no introduction, no spotlight, no music cue, just the feed, still running, still live in me. The first thing I did was nothing. No big reveal. no dramatic. I walked to center stage, slow, deliberate, and stood where Dylan had been flailing seconds ago. He was off to the side now, frozen, pale, like someone had yanked the charger out of his soul. His mouth moved, but no sound came. Maybe he was still trying to talk, maybe to the booth, maybe to the universe. I didn't look at him. The room, the real room, sat stunned. Remote attendees sat upright. Board members leaned in. Screens showed my name, my title. I control my silence. I let the last slide linger behind me. Operational control transferred, effective immediately. No color, no logo, just black and white like the truth tends to be. Then finally I spoke. Calm. Even, you said you didn't need me. Pause, I agree, you need someone better. No one moved, not even Marcus. I scanned the room, then looked directly into the camera, the boardroom feed, the investor call. Live stream beamed to every Slack login in the company. This evening, I said, there will be a formal board vote to restructure current executive leadership, per clause 12.3c of the original charter. I didn't need to explain what that meant. The smart ones were already opening documents. The rest were checking their pulse. Notifications will go out in the next hour. Legal has been briefed. I turned to Dylan. His arms were at his sides. He wasn't yelling anymore, just there. A mannequin left out in the rain. His mouth opened once. Nothing came out. I took one step toward him, stopped just shy of the spotlight's edge, and said, "Mic drop not included." Then I turned to the audience, digital and in person, and nodded once. That was it. No gloating, no theatrics, because power doesn't need to shout. The truth had already spoken. I didn't burn the company down, I rebooted it, on my terms. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.